What are we talking about? You wanted to talk about asking questions.
Well, Courtney asked me a question last week that I thought was actually like a good question, and then I had to noodle on it, and then I pulled the people online. I had to noodle on it. I had to like think it over.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Is
something to noodle on. No, it's just, that's what I say all the time. And
it's a her thing.
Yeah, it's a Mandy thing.
Yeah.
But I did. I had to noodle on it and think about what I would say. And then I wanted to see what other agents' responses were. And boy, did I. So, Courtney, what was your question? Do you remember?
Yes.
She does.
We were talking about doing interviews, like interviewing your agent. And it's, as somebody who, like, because me, I've never bought a house before. I don't know anything about, like, this world.
Yep.
What questions should I ask agents that I'm interviewing for? Does that make sense?
Yes.
You were a lot more confident in what we were doing until she asked you the question.
Until
well, because I was really hoping while we were sitting here talking about what we were going to talk about today, I was like, yeah, I remember we were talking about, you know, can you give me a little refresher about what I asked you though?
She was bluffing.
She was bluffing.
I was.
You know what though? That is 99% of real estate.
Yes.
It's just confidently saying whatever you want to say, whether or not.
I knew the realm of it. I just couldn't remember the exact question that I asked last time.
Mm-hmm. No, that was your question. If you're interviewing agents, what are the things that you should be asking them? Even if you're not a first-time home buyer, what would I recommend that you ask? And then I put it on Instagram of what other agents wish that people ask them, or what buyers or sellers wish that they would have asked their agents. And I did send Sidney a text, and Sidney did not text me back.
About what?
Do you have any thoughts on this matter? Things that you wish people had talked with their agent about prior to them making it to you?
Yes.
All right.
I have lots of things.
Okay, let's go.
I mean, how much time you got for you? How much time do you need for yours?
I don't need that much time, but I am curious from your perspective as somebody who's in the real estate world, but not necessarily in my position.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, you guys could take turns.
We could take turns.
We could take turns. You know, the biggest thing is setting proper expectations for the inspection. Explaining, because there's so many times that we show up and home inspections, we get blamed for everything. It doesn't matter what it is. We get blamed for when the deals fall apart. We get blamed for when clients ask for dumb stuff, even though we didn't tell them to ask for the dumb stuff. We get blamed for, finding things. We get blamed for not finding things. We get blamed literally for every part of the process.
I want to tell you that you're wrong, but you're not wrong.
I know. But one of the biggest problems is nobody knows what we do. And I constantly say that in training and CE classes when we talk about home inspections, is that nobody knows what we do. Clients don't know what we do. Agents don't know what we do. Some home inspectors don't know what we do, which is the running joke, right?
Yeah.
Again, a lot of great home inspectors, but that's just the fact of the matter, right? So setting proper expectations that, hey, we are here to find everything wrong with the house, everything, right?
Yep.
We are here to tell you all the bad stuff. Yes, there's some good stuff in there. But that's literally what we do. And there's nothing worse than when you come out of a crawl space and you're going over everything and you just see the client just horrified by things that you found on this 100-year-old crawl space. And it's like, that could have been better managed, right? Mm-hmm. Prior to us getting there, that these things could happen, right?
Yep.
So I think the biggest thing is that you just set those proper expectations before we even show up. What we do, what we don't do, all the things to make it just go smoother.
Yeah, I think that's a really big one. I think one of the things from my perspective as an agent that I try to do and that I wish more agents did as well is pay attention during the showing. Like I tell people all of the time, I'm going to let you look at the pretty stuff. I'm going to look for scary stuff. Yeah. And if I'm seeing things that look questionable to me, I'm sending them to you. And I'm like, hey, because the problem is by the time they make it to you, they're already under contract, right? So they've already paid an earnest money deposit. They've already committed to paying your fees. And so for me, it's if I'm looking at what I think is significant structural damage during a showing and I'm sending it to you and I'm like, hey, is this what I think it is? And you're like, I mean, I'm not in there, but it's looking sketchy. You know, like that's a conversation that I think you got to have with people ahead of time. And helping them understand, like, I am not a qualified licensed home inspector, right? Cool. But if there are things that I can see after being in thousands of houses and helping hundreds of clients, like, I'm going to at least put it on your radar prior to the showing. So that way you're aware of it before, or prior to the inspection, I should say. So that way you're aware of it ahead of time. And I also think a big one is making them pay attention to you. And also something I think that I care a lot about now at this point in my career, after doing it for years full time, is that they understand that Sid is only here for 2 to 3 hours.
Right.
And that there are certain scenarios or situations that we cannot create in that window. Yeah. And so, or if there's things that aren't installed at the time of the inspection, then we might not know.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That's not setting expectations prior to the inspection, but setting those expectations for after the inspection and move in. Mm-hmm. Because another key component of when the inspection occurs and the mindset is not only the money that they've spent, earnest money and whatnot, but this is the house that they want, right? And there's two sides to this. It's either the house because of the market and the inventory, and they've put in 7 offers and they've all been rejected, and they finally got one, right? And they're like, hey, this process is over now. And they're relieved, and then they find all the things wrong, and it's overwhelming, and it's too much for them. Now it's like, now we got to start over. Or 2, like, this is actually the house that they really, really want. They're not selling. This isn't the 15th one. Like, they're in love with this house, and they're picturing their family, and because this is an emotional process. And I've often said that, 20 years in the fire service doesn't compare to the emotions in real estate, you know, and we see people on their worst day in the fire service, and the emotions are just way more raw in this industry and way more, just more of everything. It's a very emotional roller coaster. And for us to sit there and say, yeah, your foundation wall is literally caving in and it's a $15,000 problem. And, especially if it's an as-is property, or, the seller's not going to fix it, or they were unaware that they couldn't ask for anything, like we talked about before. Wild. Because they didn't understand the terms of what they agreed to for their offer. So it's the emotional aspect, but it's like I said, you moved into the house and it's, hey, we got a roof leak. Was this missed? Well, no, there was we talked about how old the roof was. We talked about, it's been, not today, there's a hurricane coming through. We talked about how it was, 6 months of no rain, because we went through that this summer. We talked about, maybe there's a bunch of dry staining up there, whatever the case may be. But we also found 50, 60, 70 things wrong with this house. There could be other things, right? So not saying that things don't legitimately get missed, but again, we're there for 2 or 3 hours.
Right. And I think that they need to be prepared for that. And I think they also need to be prepared and pay attention to you. Like, you can see when a client's eyes are kind of just like glassing over and you're like, like, look sharp, like, pay attention.
Oh, yeah. 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 I often say, like, we broke them.
We're losing them. There they go. But for me, like, I can't have that, especially because one of the things that I see people kind of not paying attention to you on when we're running down the home inspection is things like, hey, we can't blast your AC when it's too cold outside. Right? Like, we're going to damage this unit, so we can't test this right now. Yeah. And then, you get the call where they're like, the AC is, and it's like, okay, well, we couldn't test it. Like, so I think that there does need to be some hand holding through that. Of a home inspection is so valuable, in my opinion, but it is not ever going to be a 100% guarantee that everything is perfect and you're going to live happily ever after.
And I've had that where, the agent called me, super cool agent, they were just giving me the heads up, did the inspection for the parents, and the daughter's the one that's all up in arms. And because the AC wasn't working in July. And he says, I can see in your report, it was cold that day, because it's in February when we did the inspection. I see in the report that you told them you recommend having it serviced prior to the end of the due diligence period. I said, yep. And which is a common box that's always checked. Right. You marked the box saying that it was age. You told them that it was old. You told them that you couldn't test it because it was too cold. All the things that we said about this 20, plus year old HVAC system, that we can't tell you that it may or may not work when it gets hot. And now that it's hot, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And now you mad, right? Yeah. Because you didn't do any of the things that we told you to do up until that point. Sure. So yeah, 100%.
Okay. So in regards to interviewing an agent, from your perspective, it's making sure that your agent understands the inspection period, the time frame, how to word verbiage in the offer, and how to prep a client for what this is going to look like.
Yeah, and there's two other things. There's one, it used to be 14 days, right? Inspection periods. Some of us, we still get that. But for a lot of agents, we're in this new normal of 5 to 7 days.
Yeah, and the contract default is actually 10 now.
Yeah, and we get so, hey, I got a 3-day turnaround. What do you have? It's Friday. Like, I don't know what to tell you, So the point of that is call if you're shortening up your inspection period, you need to make that phone call of your preferred inspector, right? To make sure that they can get you in
prior to submitting your offer.
Yeah, because as the old saying goes, a failure to plan on your part doesn't constitute emergency on my part. Yep. But we get but we get those agents that get really angry at us because we can't do an inspection Sunday night at 8:00. We're not willing to do that. So between that and then just being able to, lack of better words, just kind of stay in your lane too.
Yes.
And maybe it's because I only see the home inspection side, so I don't see the interactions with the lender, the interactions with, the title company or interactions with whatever. But, I feel like a lot of times agents interject wrong information during the home inspection, and we will get a follow-up like, well, you said it wasn't that big a deal. Like, no, we did not. Right. Your agent said it wasn't a big deal, and understanding that those short time frames may also lead to additional inspections, because there's a lot of times that we get there like, hey, you may need to call an HVAC. You may need to call a structural engineer. You may need to get a roofer out here. Will they come out here for free? No. Some will, not engineers, but, some roofers will come out. But we're in a time where a lot of guys, a lot of trades are tired of getting a call from the buyer's agent. And this is just being honest, because I talk to a lot of them. Yep. And they're tired of going out doing free assessments for work that they will never get. Right. Because the seller's going to hire who they want to hire. Or the buyer's going to get a credit, and then they're going to either do it themselves or hire somebody different. Yeah. And it's time and money. That's all it is. It's time and money in business. Yeah. So it's understanding like, hey, I'm on day 5 of an inspection period, and all I have is 5 days. And you mean to tell me I got to get an HVAC guy here? I mean, you don't have to. That's just like my opinion. Right.
Because you're not an HVAC guy. I think that's the other thing that clients need to be prepped for is like, Sid is a home inspector. You are not a trade specialist for X, Y, and Z. And so I think that's another thing that needs preparation.
Yeah. So it's understanding, and I get it. As a buyer, money's just flying out of your bank account. But it's understanding like, hey, you're paying for the home inspection, but there could be follow-up inspections that we need to be prepared for depending on what he finds. Sometimes it's cut and dry. Sometimes there's not really a choice, right? Because when we see a truss system that's completely jacked, you can call a contractor, get a quote. But if you want to do it properly, like we don't quote code, but code says best standards stay. Every place says you have to have a structural engineer to evaluate it. Have to. Yep. And that's going to be a headache later on. You got to sell a house, you don't have that paperwork. So it's just managing all those expectations and understanding what the process actually is. So your client's not looking at me like, what do you mean I got to spend another $500? Yeah, I mean, sorry. But
yeah. And I think that this is the number one thing that I wish agents would understand is that really your job is to set proper expectations and to hold their hand along the entirety of that transaction. Yeah. And it's not to get outside of your lane. And I tell people this a lot of times. Like they'll call me up and they'll ask a question. I'm like, that's a Sidney question. I said, I'm happy to reach out to him, or you can, I'll send you a screenshot. Or, that's a lender question. Like I can give you my thoughts and opinion on it, but like at the end of the day, you need to talk to a lender, or that's an accountant question.
And I do it all the time, like, hey, can we ask for that? That's a Mandy question,
Yeah.
Or, whatever the question is, like, yep, that's not a me question.
Yeah.
Do they have to fix that? No, but I also don't know your contract to see what you can negotiate. So that's a Mandy question.
Yep.
For sure. But like I said, we see that all the time where it's just like, again, and they're not saying not some agents don't understand, because you do have agents that used to be in the trades, or they're an engineer. There's agents out there that have a really good understanding of what we do. They used to be a home inspector, whatever the case is. Sure. But there's always exceptions to every rule too, and there's a lot of times where I've sat there, and every time I said something, the agent said the opposite. And then when it all came back, the agent's calling us like, hey, because the good example is we had a radon test, and the house was big enough or had multi-levels, and they needed two. And the agent's like, you don't need to. Flat out said, you don't need to. Radon monitors. Came back high. And then the agent's calling us like, well, what's the mitigation cost? We don't know, because we don't know what the full scope of the work is, because you cut out half the testing. Mm-hmm. This is why you don't cut out half the testing. Mm-hmm. But you veered out of your lane, and you gave false information, and now you're in a situation trying to explain to your client something you don't have all the information for, because you refused that information.
Yep.
Good times.
It is a good time.
And again, our fault.
Yeah. I will say, from an agent's perspective, I do think there is times where, like, you guys, you come in during a very specific window, right? Yes. And it's kind of like you drop your grenade, and then you guys are just like, bye.
Oh, I say all the time, we show up, we start a dumpster fire, and then we leave.
And then you're out and on to the next every time. It's like, that's why I ask you at inspections. I'm like, you going to ruin my day today?
Most likely.
Sometimes, yeah. Most of the time. That's why I say crawl spaces are where dreams go to die.
That's
every time.
That's right. So what's some other questions that you want clients to ask their agents?
So there's a few of my little nuggets of advice, and then there's also some from other people, but I really like what you have to say from the perspective of just prepping them for the inspection, because I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think inspection 90% of the time is where your transaction's going to fall apart.
It is, 100%.
And so being really well prepped for that, and ensuring that you have an agent that knows paragraph 16, which is the inspection paragraph, and those timelines, is something that I just think is really vital. So I think if you're interviewing an agent, that would be one of the questions that I would ask them is, can you walk me through the inspection period, what those timelines look like, what the cost associated is, like really get prepared for what that is. The other thing that I know we've talked about is I actually give them a copy of a home inspection, and I black out all the information, but that way they've seen one before we even go out looking at houses. Some other little nuggets of advice that I got was, what is your specific strategy for selling homes, and what do your timelines look like for you? So if you're interviewing a listing agent, asking for specifics instead of, I know for me personally, and I know for other agents, we get asked a lot, like, how many years have you been doing this? Or how many houses have you sold? And it's like, I can't tell you how many houses I've sold. I really don't know. Like, it's a lot. I can tell you that much, but no, I don't count them. And so, and I also don't think that asking a question like that is actually serving you well as the client or the potential client. What you need is specifics, and what you need is strategy, and what you need is like, what's the plan? Yeah,
because at the end of the day, and I also, again, we have these conversations when we start talking about, because I do a lot of VHDA first-time homebuyer classes, and one of the things that they say about finding a home inspector is experience. Yeah. And I tell every single class is like, one, everybody starts somewhere. Mm-hmm. That's the way it is, right? Yep. If no one gives you a shot, then there wouldn't be an industry to begin with, in any industry. But two, experience is relative. Mm-hmm. And we always had a saying in the fire department, do you have 20 years of experience, or do you have 20 years of reliving the same day over and over again? Because there's a difference. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who peaked after they got their license. Yeah. Realtors and home inspectors, right? Like, I learned everything I need to know. Or they stopped learning 10 years ago because they've been doing it for 30 years and they haven't kept up with the changes. But also we have these cool little things in our pockets now that the whole world is full of information, right?
Yeah.
So we've accelerated the learning process because of how much information and how easy the information is to get.
Mm-hmm. And I wholeheartedly agree with that because I see it, right? Like I have the opportunity to teach classes now weekly to the brokerage and to other brokerages, but it's this conversation or realizing that experience is relative, because I've run into those agents where they're like, sweetie, I've been doing this for 35 years. And I'm like, all you did was tell me that you're old. That doesn't mean anything, because I've seen agents that have had their license for 2 years or a year who are putting in an astronomical amount of training and work and really are so good at what they do.
Yeah.
And so I have a hard time with that, knowing what I know from behind the scenes, because it's like, hey, just because somebody's done it for 35 years, to your point, it doesn't mean that they didn't stop learning 2 decades ago.
Right. Or that they've been doing it wrong for that many years, right?
Especially because it changes so much in our industry.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who's a contractor, and, we always say if someone's yelling at you, it's because they know that they're wrong, right? They can't prove that they're right. And he would tell clients, just because you're mad and you're yelling, now you're just loud and now you're
loud
and
wrong.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's all you're doing. Like before you're wrong, now you're just loud and wrong. So it doesn't matter how many.
It's not better.
Right.
There's this meme. It was a while ago, but it was like, hi, you mad, hi, you mad.
Yeah. It does. I think it does get to that point though, but it kind of leads into the next little piece of advice that I got was, how do you stay current on market trends, and what additional trainings do you attend weekly and monthly? I think this is a huge question that people should be asking the agents that they're interviewing, especially right now. I mean, I teach contracts, forms, and ethics, and so we have seen so many changes over just the last 12 months to our forms and the documents that we use. And so if you're asking an agent this question and they fumble, that's a red flag immediately. Yeah. They should be able to rattle off market stats, no problem. And they should be able to tell you how frequently they are doing trainings every time.
Yeah.
If they can't, big red flag.
100%.
I liked that one. The other one that I thought was good was, how do you determine the listing price, or how do you determine the appropriate asking price for a home when you're representing buyers? I think this is a huge misconception that folks have, is that we have software that prices homes for us.
Yeah.
That software does exist. Here's what I can promise you. It's trash garbage. If an agent brings you a printout from a software system, that's a lazy agent. I'm sorry. Like, I know some agents are going to come for me for this, but it is like they are not accurate enough yet.
Sure.
And they don't take into account everything that needs.
There's too many intangibles.
There is 100%. And for me, it's like, okay, that's the same as saying like, oh, my Zestimate is this, so that's what we're going to list at. It's like, nope, don't do that.
The Zillow thing?
Yeah, the Zillow's estimate. Yeah. So those are not.
That sounds like a spice.
Oh,
that does not sound.
Zestimate. No, that's what they're called though, right?
Look,
am I?
yes,
Yeah. I'm like, am I right?
Yes. Yeah,
Watch
so
me say
Courtney
it
has been in this industry for over 2 years now. It's the first time she's heard Zestimate.
Oh no, they haunt my dreams.
The only time that I really look on Zillow is, one, to make myself sad about how expensive like apartments and stuff are, and two, to get the like square footage from a home that we're putting into the system to like double check it.
Yeah.
Because normally I'll be like, oh, what's the square footage? And you get people that are like, I think it's around like 1,500.
Me.
Yeah, that's when I pull out the Zillow and I just base it off of that, because I don't have the MLA.
Yeah, the square footage and stuff is, well, it's what's been inputted into the MLS. Anyways,
yeah,
right?
anything that's in Zillow.
I won't say it's
come
correct,
from
but it's what
MLS.
the agents put into the MLS, which is interesting, because I know an agent. She just moved up here from North Carolina, and in North Carolina, like, it's a very much strict. Like, you have to get somebody out there to measure the rooms and everything.
Oh, no. If you look at the bottom of our MLS, it literally has verbiage that says information is deemed reliable but not guaranteed.
Yes. So, because she was like mind blown, like, what do you mean I don't have to do that? You know, I'm like, oh, well, the seller told me this, or you go off tax records or whatever. But, there's people that don't pull permits and finish their basement and all those things.
And there's agents who don't question that.
Yeah,
they don't
100%.
walk into something and be like, this house is way more than 2,000 square
we've
feet.
showed up.
They don't pull tax
records. We've showed up for a 2,000 square foot inspection, and it's been 4,500 square feet.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the listing says 2,000.
And the buyer's agent didn't do anything, right? They
and
didn't pull tax records or ask for permits.
That is one, that drastically changes our price, And then two, it can change, like, hey, we have a next appointment. We didn't allow enough time to do a 4,500 square foot house.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So I would ask, how do you go about pricing a home? And for me, it's old school, but I still do it by hand, and I still give you the printouts, and I will go through everything with you. And what I will say is I have heard multiple times how much my clients appreciate that, because I'm not just showing up with like an automated, hey, I printed this off, this is what this says. Especially because if you look at those software, it really makes me laugh. And even if you scroll down on a Zestimate on Zillow, it gives you a range, right? The range is like over $50,000. So I'm like, okay, that's wild.
Yeah.
Like, how do we determine this price? Like, what are we doing? So I think you need somebody who's actually knows what they're doing, who actually knows how to price a home and can literally walk you through, this is where I start, this is what I do, blah, blah, blah. And for me, it is always fun when I'm going into a listing appointment. One of the first questions I ask them is, do you have a number in your head that you want to list this for?
Yeah.
And they always say yes. And I say, okay. And then I say, what's your Zestimate? And they smile because I know you looked, babe. Yeah. I know you did. So just tell me what it says, and don't think that I didn't already look, because I did. It's in my notes. Because I think as a listing agent, that's what you're going to be combating, right? Yeah. Is that number that they have in their head, or what Zillow said, where they're like, well, I mean, my neighbor's house sold for this. And I'm like, your neighbor renovated. Yeah. And they're 700 square feet bigger than you. So what do we think that does? And they're like, well, maybe like a little. I think
just a little.
Yeah, it's that conversation of being able to give them the details surrounding that and kind of the strategy behind it, and hold their hand throughout that. So I think that's a big one, is asking, how do you price a home?
I think that would be a fun topic to dive into later. The process of actually pricing a home, because that's
okay.
I don't understand that.
No, I'd be happy to do it. I do think it might be something that would be a little difficult to talk through
with the home inspector.
Well, that too, but also like I can't show it.
Yeah.
So it might be hard to talk somewhat about it, but I think we could figure it out. But I do think that's one that people need to be educated on, because it's just this assumption that
I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that you guys did that.
Oh, yep, 100%.
No, we can be able to show it.
Yeah?
If you can put it on a computer, right?
I could, probably. Okay.
Yeah. We'll be able to
send me graphics.
I'm going to do home pricing 101 with Mandy Whitlock.
Yeah, I think one of the important things, like we always talk about the buy side, but since you're talking about sellers, one of the important things I think on my end for a seller, even though we don't interact with them in theory.
If you're lucky.
But I think a lot of times listing agents are hands off. They just say, hey, a home inspection's this time. Like, hey, you got to have a home inspection. It's scheduled for Tuesday at 9, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important for the list agent to make sure that house is properly prepped. Mm-hmm. You can't make a client do things. I get that. But there's so many times that we show up and we can't get into a crawl space because of it's padlocked. Like we can cut it, but we got to get permission, and then nobody answers the phone, and then we got to come back. Or we can't get to the electrical panel because there's
a fridge in the
way. A lot of things. The other day, opened up the closet. It was a townhouse. Opened up the closet, and the water heater was underneath the stairs behind a panel. And what do you think's in the closet? Whole bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So again, it all slows down the process. And two, we'll move stuff. Like we moved all the stuff out. The agent helped me. But a lot of home inspectors don't touch stuff.
No, they won't.
And I understand why, right? Because if we break it, that's on us. And of course we are in that age of, whether we broke it or not, seller comes in like, who touched my stuff, right? And now there's just a whole big thing. So it's so to make sure the process is sped up and you don't have the buyer's agent asking for extensions, the house needs to be properly set for.
That's very good advice. very, very good advice, and something that I think you could ask an agent in the interviews is, what do I have to do to prep for home inspection, knowing that it's such a big deal, especially because I think people start packing up their stuff. And a big one that I see is they're loading up their garage or their basement with boxes and they're stacking them really high. And then you guys can't see what you need to see either. And so I think that's super good advice, and something I probably need to do a better job of, making sure that the house is ready for you guys so that we don't run into delay.
What about pre-listing inspections?
Oh, that's a topic for a whole other day. Like, okay. I really think that that's a whole other episode, don't you?
It is. Yeah.
If we're going to go there, let's go there. But I think we need adequate time for that one.
Yeah, because my thoughts are very much different than most realtors on pre-listing inspections.
Yeah. That's actually a good thing, I think, to discuss, because I think my stance on it is going to be different from my lane versus his lane.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for that one, actually.
There we go. Write that down.
I know. It's on the list, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Another huge one. This is for me personally that I think that people should be asking their agents is, do you work independently or do you work on a team, or who do you have that works for you? Because if your agent just does everything themselves, that could cause problems. It could cause issues on your end as far as what you have access to. And it's one of the things that it's really important for me to market and to explain to people that I have a transaction coordinator that is specific to only listings. I have a transaction coordinator who is specific to only my buyers. I have a managing broker. So should you have additional questions, or if you need additional resources, or if you have a question of something I'm saying and you want somebody else to say it, I also have an attorney on retainer and a graphic designer. And so I think asking them, okay, who works underneath you is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And figuring out, do you work for a team? Because if you're hiring somebody who works for a team, how much of a say do they actually get if they technically are working for somebody else or underneath somebody else's name? Do they have to do things specific to the way that that person wants it done, or do they get to actually work for themselves and run things how they want to? So I think it can be a really big benefit to you if there's an entire support staff behind your agent as well. And if there's not, understand that that agent has to stay on top of everything by themselves, and that could cause problems. There are some agents who do it and they do it flawlessly. There are some agents who balls get dropped frequently because they don't have the support that they need.
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts. And if you're just dealing with one deal at a time, then sure, right? You can keep track of it. But if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 deals going at a time, like there's a lot of things happening there.
Yep. And all of these timelines are specific to each transaction. So that's why in the previous episode, we talked about, like, what is their max for what they can take on, I think is another question. Because if I have 8 transactions going at once that all have different timelines running at different times, and those clocks run out, and it's just me trying to figure out who is doing what when, I would die. Like, that's why I have the support staff that I do, is because I need help with that. I need to be able to make sure that you are getting everything out of your transaction that you possibly can.
Yeah.
I'm curious your thoughts on that, because you're very familiar with teams and how they operate in the real estate world.
Sure.
Do you agree or do you disagree as far as there could be a benefit to working on a team, a real estate team, or there could be a benefit to actually not being on a team?
I think it all depends on what are you looking for? What do you need? Because it's like, if you need the support, right, and you don't want to quote unquote pay for it yourself, because we're going to a pool now, right? It's not just I'm coming out of pocket 100% for transaction coordinators and all the things, but we're collectively have
we're sharing the load,
right? And that's what you need, then sure. If you go to that team and that's what you're getting with your splits, but you need training and that team's not providing you training, then that team's a waste of your time, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you need leads, right? Because there's a lot of teams that provide leads, right? And like, you know what? I don't need help with all this other stuff. I just want leads, So it all depends on what the team provides versus what you need.
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot of people, because again, we talk to a lot of agents, and they complain that they're, they want to leave a team, they want to do this, they want to do that. And it all comes down to what it is that you need. There's agents that's like, the leads are cool, but I want to be able to learn to fish for myself. And we just don't get the training. And okay, well then that split's not worth it for you. Right? You got
and they're never going to teach you, because why would they?
They're not, right? So it really just depends on that individual standpoint and what your individual needs are, whether or not. And then there's just some agents that's just like, you know what? I don't want to share my commission. I don't want to split it. I can do all this on my own. I'll hire a transaction coordinator, whatever the case may be. And they're very much self-sufficient.
Yeah. And I think for a consumer standpoint, it comes down to asking these questions of who works for them, who do they work for, how much freedom do they have with X, Y, and Z, just to be sure that this agent is going to be a good fit for you. And then one of my favorite questions that I get asked, and I prefer this question and think this question is so much more valuable than asking like, how many years have you been doing this, which I'll answer that question happily, or what's your production numbers or whatever. I don't think that those serve you best as a consumer, somebody who's going to hire an agent. The one that I like that I get is what sets you apart from other agents, or why choose you over your competitors. And in my opinion, an agent should be able to rattle off an answer for you. An agent should be able to tell you exactly why you should hire them. If they can't confidently explain to you why you should be hiring them, red flag immediately. Yeah. And I also think part of that, I would love for people to start asking their agents, do you do this job full time? Instead of what are your production numbers? Yes. This is the number one biggest question I think you should be asking realtors that you interview. Do you do this full time? And for how long have you been a full-time agent? Yeah. Not a part-time agent, not somebody who sells a couple houses a year, not somebody who's got a full-time actual job, I say, like a 9 to 5, and they do this on the side for fun. Like, this is not a hobby. Like, you should hire somebody who does this full-time. Yeah. 100%. 100%. I mean, I don't know. Probably just the barrier to entry is low enough that people feel like they can do it part-time. But again, it's hard. I mean, there's just too much legalities. There's too much paperwork. There's too much moving parts. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that, Sidney? You said it's what? It's hard?
It's hard.
Hard to be an agent? Is that what you're saying?
To be a part-time agent.
Oh.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to be an agent full-time.
I don't know what you're trying to get at.
I'm trying to get at the fact that people think it's easy money, but it's easy money if you're doing onesie twosies
we get
here
that with
and there.
Home inspections, right? Because everybody thinks, home inspections are easy, Right. And we've had a lot of previous clients go to the class, like, yeah, I can do this, because they see us wandering around like we're lost. Mm-hmm. All you do is check some outlets and some doors. I can do this. And there's a lot of times, like me and Gordon talked about this one time. How many ride-alongs have we had that we never see in business, ever? And it's because they start actually paying attention to what we're doing during their ride-along time. They're like, this is a lot. Mm-hmm. And we tell them, like, yes, you are supposed to know a lot. This is more than just taking the panel off, looking at some wires, checking the outlet, opening and closing some windows. Like, there's a lot. Like, when you're looking at a gas furnace, there's a lot to take in. And there's very, very few people that we have done ride-alongs for that they are actually doing home inspections.
It's like what Gordon and Logan were talking about earlier today at today's meeting, the Great Wonder. The
pre-drywall. That's what they call it, the Great Wonder. It doesn't look like I'm doing anything, and I'm just wandering around, but I'm actually doing a lot.
Like, I promise you, I'm doing something.
Yeah.
I mean, you're kind of just looking at sticks and bricks at that point. There's not really. That's funny. The Great Wonder. I love that.
So we're pressing up against the a hard out on this one. Yeah. So, got anything else to wrap it up? Any other questions?
Go through them all real fast. Do a speed run of.
No, I don't think we should do that, but I do think we should do a follow-up on how agents should interview their questions, because that's the flip side of this. When I go into an interview with you, I'm also interviewing you on whether or not I'm taking you on as a client. And it's really fun when you get to that point in your career where it's like, listen, my favorite advice I ever got in my career is ain't all money good money. And so there are questions that I ask specifically from my position that tell me if this is going to be a good fit. And I love the interview process because to me, I just want the chance, like the opportunity to sit down. And if at the end of it, you're like, no, I don't like Mandy, I don't vibe with her, I don't like her personality, or I don't feel like she knows what she's talking about. Okay. Like, that's fine. I want you to have a positive experience with who you hire. But I do think there's a flip side to this conversation of my advice for agents now, after all this time, doing it full time, what it is that I ask of clients in those interviews as well.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, are we going to do a mock interview?
Oh my God. Could you
Are we
imagine?
doing a part 2?
Are we going to role play? Let's go, Courtney.
Going to role play?
Whoa. Let's go.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll do a part 2 then.
Let's do it.
All right, awesome.